Hi, everyone. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me before we begin and you can see everything. Setting. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for tuning in to our Big Feelings, Little Bodies talk. My name is Danyale Washington. I'm a parent coach on the ParentGood app. I have experience with children of all ages. I've worked in public and private child care. Excuse my voice. I'm just getting over a little bit of a cold, so my voice is just coming back. Um, I've always had a passion for helping children and their families, which fueled me to become a parent coach, which is why I am before you today. That passion can make me talk a little bit quick. So if you ever need me to slow down, go ahead and just say, can you repeat that or anything like that? And I will go over it again. We will have a question and answer at the end, but I'll try to keep up with your comments as they come in as well, just to make sure that nothing's lost in translation. I want to make sure everyone gets everything they need out of this talk. Like I said, I'm super, super excited to be here, super excited to share my expertise with you all. And let's dig right in. Tonight, I will go over some background of just behavior and the tips that I can give you to help your child and you understand kind of what's going on when your child experiencing big emotions and engaging in undesirable behavior. I like to use the words desirable and undesirable because I don't believe there are overtly bad behavior. I think there's things that are good, and there are desired and there's undesired, right? There are things that we want our child to behave, a specific action that we want our children to do, and there are things we don't. So I think we take that label out of it. We don't create that space for your child to kind of have that self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you keep hearing, I'm doing bad things, I'm a bad child, sometimes they start to internalize that, and then they can kind of become its own monster and take over its own effect. So in this talk, it'll be undesirable and desirable behaviors. The desirable will be the ones that we want them to increase, the things that we want them to do, like waiting their turn, using their words instead of fighting or kicking, things like that. Children are constantly changing and developing, which requires them to have to learn and navigate as they grow. And when they interact with the world differently as they grow, there's many feelings, fears, and things like that that go along with it. And sometimes that can present itself as tantrums in our eyes, but really it's them testing out different behaviors to understand the world and their place in it, right? So when we see our child dumping out their toys for the 15th time after telling them, hey, let's not do that, let's keep our toys in the bucket, they're really just trying to understand what happens. When I place my force on this, when I do this, what happens, right? They're just trying to make everything make sense. We learn to approach behavior. When we want to approach behavior, the best way to do it is to figure out the whys behind behaviors, which is what's behind me. There are 4 functions of behavior in psychology, or kind of what that means. There's 4 different reasons or things that drive behavior. And those are social attention, tangibles or activities, escape or avoidance, and self-stimulation. I will go through each one of these and kind of give examples of them and how they can present themselves in your child. But first is social attention. Social attention is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's something they want some kind of attention, whether that's good or bad, right? That's either if it's like you coming over and playing with them or it's you yelling at them. They just want some attention coming from anyone. They just want that interaction. This may look like your child making a silly noise to make you laugh, or your child calling your name to get you to come over, things like that. Or on the other side, that could be your child throwing a toy at you to get your attention, or throwing a tantrum if he feels like you haven't responded to him in a quick enough manner, right? It's all behaviors that they're engaging to get that attention the only way, in any way they see fit. The second is tangible or activities. They want something that either they can get, like a toy, food, or an activity like, oh, I want to watch a show, or I want to go ride my bike, something like that. And that presents your child as maybe like kicking or screaming if they want a particular snack, or if they're saying they want this toy and you didn't want to give it to them. Maybe they didn't want to go to school, or maybe they want to go to a play place, right? And they are nagging and asking. It's because their desire is to go to a certain place, a certain time or a certain activity. The third is escape or avoidance. Like I said, tell me if I'm talking too fast or if you need something reiterated. But the third is escape or avoidance. And that's when you want to avoid something. That's when that's when your child runs away from you and sprints the other direction when it's time for bath time or bedtime or something that they don't want to do, right? So, or your child refusing to get dressed because they don't want to go to school. It's all the behaviors being driven by their want or desire to get out of something. Lastly, there is sensory or self-stimulation, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's when the behavior itself is giving them the pleasure or the desire that they want. This looks like my child, at least my daughter, she sucks her fingers. That's her way of calming herself. So she's not looking for anything. She doesn't want an activity. She doesn't want attention. She's not looking to gain anything. The sucking of her fingers in itself, that behavior is fulfilling that need or that desire, which is to calm herself. When we take a minute to look at the why, then we can focus on how we can change behaviors. So when your child is explaining or exhibiting challenging or undesired behaviors, we can take a step back and say, okay, well, what could be driving this, right? Is it they want my attention? And how can I give them that attention without it being given to them in a space that reinforces the undesired behavior? So if it looks like they want my attention, but they're screaming at me, how can I give them that attention to help fuel or reinforce the positive behavior? So that looks more of trying to give them attention before they get to that point of throwing a tantrum. So if you see that your child's trying to connect with you, maybe they're saying they want to show you a picture and they ask you one time, twice, you see them get a little frustrated. You can be like, hey, I see that you really want to show me that picture. Mommy's doing something right now, but I can see it in 2 minutes or something like that. Trying to intervene before the undesired behavior is exhibited makes a world of difference, because instead of having to correct the behavior, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, instead of having to correct it, we're already kind of showing and modeling what we expect and the behavior that we want to see. And if we look at the functions that drive behavior, then we can see why us using, us showing them or reinforcing the negative behavior by maybe yelling or screaming can increase it instead of decrease it. We want to make sure that we shift the focus from the negatives to the positive. And that's what I mean by wanting to use positive feedback and try to engage with your child when they're exhibiting the behaviors that we want to see. And how do we achieve this? This is the big question mark, all right? A lot of parents were like, we know what we want to see, but how do we get there? I don't know how to get my child from stop screaming in the supermarket because they wanted a certain snack, and I told them not today. I have put together a model called the PEACE model, PEACE, and that helps parents do just that. We'll use a scenario that'll help kind of connect the dots of maybe your child or maybe a child that you've witnessed. They are exhibiting aggressive behaviors because they want a certain toy that someone else is showing or someone else is using. And how can we get them to learn, or how do we get them to use better their words, or use gentle hands, or to not engage in the aggressive behavior and learn to keep their hands to themselves and to wait their turns? We'll go through each one of those. But before I start, does anyone have any questions about any of the function behaviors or anything that's happening now that I've covered?
I have a question. So you mentioned that your daughter, that basically to calm herself down, she likes to suck her finger. So I have a 2-year-old and she does the same thing. I noticed the one thing that she does is when she sees herself getting, like frustrated, she'll suck her finger and then she has her little teddy bear that she rubs, and that's what really calms her down. But at what point do you think that you kind of have to look at it as a sign of something else? Like sensory, anything like that, it can kind of be a trigger for, okay, is that just her knowing how to self-soothe, or do I kind of need to take an extra look and see that this is possibly, like I know with girls, they see autism differently and things like that. Like when do you kind of, know when to get extra eyes and ears in on that, do you think?
So that's a two-part question. I think all of us, just as human nature to find, we all have our own kind of self-soothing techniques, right? We all do something that helps us soothe. And it's funny that you say your daughter rubs her teddy bear. My daughter sucks her fingers and rubs her belly button. And that kind of what calms her down. I think you have to look kind of at the whole picture. If she's showing other benchmarks that may kind of raise a red flag that there might be more underlying things that she may have a little bit of, a couple of other markers. I don't think the self-soothing in itself and the self-stimulation, when I say stimulation, I think in it there is a big correlation with stimulation and autism. They're not mutually exclusive, right? It doesn't mean because you need to self-stimulate that you are 100% on the spectrum. It just means that sometimes you engage in behaviors because that behavior in yourself is just pleasing, or it's bringing out something that some kind of feeling or sensation that helps you. I think if you do have some indication, I'm always a big believer of follow your gut. So if your mom gut is telling you, hey, I think there might be a little something here, there's nothing wrong. You say your daughter's 2, correct?
She's 2. She's going on 3, yes.
Yeah. So I would say, I think you definitely want to trust your gut. If you feel like there's other markers, I don't say if it's just her self-stimulating with her fingers and rubbing her teddy bear, I wouldn't say that 100% is like a green light to go and get her evaluated. But I would say if there are other indicators that are kind of making you feel like that might be something that she is, that needs to be evaluated, I'd say go in and there's no like problem getting her evaluated, right? But that's if she's showing other indicators. And I will say, typically a lot of organizations don't test for autism before 3. So I think maybe just keep an eye on it. Like I said, kind of jot it down, take a note, talk to her pediatrician as you go in, and kind of just keep an eye on if any of those other markers come with. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Is there any other questions before I move on? Okay. So the PEACE model.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Anytime I'm ever hearing about like toddlers acting out and stuff like that, it's always like against, like my daughter's very physical when she gets angry towards other people and other kids, and she's gotten like kicked out of some activities and stuff for it. And it's only ever really when it's a sharing issue or she's being told no. Mm-hmm. But here recently she's gotten more like if she can't hit other people, she'll hit herself and she'll scratch herself. She'll bite herself to the point where she leaves. Like last week she left because she was in her car seat and she was like constrained. She left like bloody marks on her face and bruised her hand because she bit herself so hard. And we just want to help her, because when she's like that, there's nothing we can do. Like we've tried everything. And when she's in that zone, there's nothing that we can do. And we just want to know if it's like something to be concerned about. And because I never really hear people talking about children like hurting themselves, it's always them just hurting other kids or parents or whatever.
So it's actually, when I talk about aggressive behavior, this is why I use this model. And you'll notice I use a lot of my real life experiences to help out, because I believe it helps out. My daughter is a lot like that. She went through a really big phase where when she's upset, she would throw her body on the ground. She would bang her head. And how old is your daughter? It was Stacy, correct?
Haley. She's 2.5.
Okay. Hey, I'm so sorry. I'm not good with names as it is, and then like there's a lot of names going on here.
You're fine.
So you said 2.5. Yeah, I would say it's tricky, right? Because they don't see it as them hurting themselves. They see it as them expressing themselves, like expressing their displeasure in whatever's happening, right? So it's really just learning. It's trying to that piece I was talking about, trying to intervene before she gets there. I know it's easier said than done because you kind of have to watch them like a hawk, but I would literally just make sure that her body is safe, whatever she is. I let my daughter get her aggression out any way she could. And when she would get into those moments, I agree that when they're in a heightened state, it's very hard to bring that down. Is she really big on physical touch? Like, is she good with like being, I guess, co-regulated? Like, was she like a cuddler? Was that something that she's open to or receptive to?
She's open to it when she wants to do it. If you just try to grab her and cuddle her, not so much, but she does like to when she's the one that initiates the idea. She's all about things she wants to do, and she wants to be she wants to be making decisions. So
so that's that control piece, right? That's part of what we were talking about. That's that control piece. A lot of children, when they exhibit those kind of behaviors, it's because they're trying to have some control over whatever's happening, right? You said it's when she was restrained, right? So imagine, like, there's not many choices children get to make in a day, right? So allowing for those opportunities for them to exhibit and to exude that choice and that power over their own body will help take away her needing to exhibit that when she doesn't need to, or in times where it's not necessary, right? So if it's getting into her car seat is a big thing. Maybe it's like, well, do you want to help me put this on, right? Giving her little instances to kind of wield her power or her control so that it's not all like something's being done to me all the time. It's my mom putting on my coat. It's my mom putting me in the car. It's my mom buckling me in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But like, I feel like we already give her, like, we let her make a lot of decisions. We let her kind of like decide what she wants for snack. We let her pick out her clothes, and we ask her if it's a day where we don't have a lot of plans, or I pick her up from daycare, I ask her what she wants to do, and just like little stuff. And so I feel like we're doing that to an extent for sure.
Yeah, I would say this is something, I mean, I don't want to take up too much time because I want to make sure we get through everything, but this is something if you absolutely would want, you can book me through the app and we can talk about this one-on-one. But to kind of...
I really wanted to know what it was like embedded in, because when I mentioned it to her pediatrician, she asked me about sensory, and we read up on it, and I was like, no, that's not it. Like, so I just mainly wanted to know kind of where it may have been.
Yeah, that it's hard to say without background, and me kind of knowing just like where it's coming from, and like just I would have to have a little bit more background and talk to you a little bit more to be able to answer that. But I would say just keeping her body safe as much as you can to make sure, like, if she's gonna fall out, making sure there's nothing around her. She's gonna express herself, especially if that's the way that she kind of outwardly releases that tension in her body. So, and then when she's done, co-regulating with her, which is what we'll talk about as well. Co-regulating and connecting with her so that she can learn a more positive and effective way to handle those emotions. And we'll talk about that for sure.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. No, you're welcome. And Isabella, tantrums and demanding and hitting, that's hard to say. I think it's kind of like an ebb and flow with children. They'll hit a stride and it'll go away. And then sometimes you have an off day, right? I don't think there's a cutoff of like them never having a bad day or throwing a tantrum, but there is certain leaps in developments that does kind of come with like the hitting and the demanding, all of that. And it's definitely in that 0 to 5. There's a lot of rapid growth and development that happens in 0 to 5. And like I said, as they can grow and they're learning and their body's changing and their brain is changing so rapidly, they're constantly testing things. That demanding and hitting and tantrums is them testing boundaries. And this is why it's really important that we do have really, really firm and really clear and concise boundaries, which we'll talk about as well as I go through it. Christy, I'm gonna go through this and then I'll make sure to come back and answer that. I just want to make sure that we get through all of this. The peace model, let me turn this around so that you guys can see it, because it is a lot and I want to make sure everyone can see it. The peace model that I came together, can everyone, I moved it. Can everyone see it? I'm getting used to this virtual world, so bear with me. It's so bizarre. The peace model that I use, can everyone see this? Is this clear. It's 5 steps and tips to help you kind of navigate those challenging behaviors. P, as you can see, stands for patience and practice. It is so important for us to model patience and model what it looks like to regulate our emotions effectively, right? Because it's hard if we're telling our child we cannot hit when we're upset, we cannot scream when we're upset, and then we do it, right? Because the children are sponges. They're constantly looking and soaking in information. We want to make sure that the what we're exhibiting is what we want them to emulate, right? So you have to be very, very intentional about how we respond to them in their troubling moments, right? Because if they're having a hard time and our immediate reaction to them having a hard time is to snap back at them and be like, oh, you're being really difficult and and I'm not saying like this is not to make anyone feel bad. We've all been there. When they're challenging, right? And we've all been there. But when you can kind of co-regulate or regulate yourself, and it's okay, 100% okay, to take a second, right? To step back. You don't have to respond immediately, especially if you can feel it. Kind of being in tune to what your body's feeling will really help you as well. Because if you are heightened and you feel that tension and that frustration, they're going to feel it as well. And it's just going to add fuel to an already inflamed kind of situation. So just making sure that when we're responding to them, we are as calm as we can be in that situation and practicing patience with them. It shows that they're safe and they have a safe haven in us. And this comes to that piece of being connected with them, having that connection with your child and having them feel that they can express themselves to you will help in this is kind of, Haley, I think it's Haley that I talked to first. This comes to that piece of my daughters want me to touch her, making sure that we respond with patience and building that trust with them that like when you get upset, I'm not going to get upset with you for being upset. That will help in those moments where when you're trying to connect with her to help her regulate herself, her not being like, oh, well, I don't want that because you're frustrated, right? It helps that you can kind of help them and model that, what you want them to see, right? Mirror that. Practice has 2 parts. The practice portion of this has 2 parts. We as parents have to practice what we preach, which is what I was kind of saying before. We have to model what we want them to do. So if it's, and that comes down, I mean, I have really bad road rage and my son will tell me all the time, like, Mom, you have to calm down. He's 5. And it's just like, I have to be very mindful that when he's in the car, if he sees that when I'm frustrated, what I do is yell, or I kind of like, I don't know how to regulate once again, then he's like, okay, well, I'm frustrated. So I'm going to yell and I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make me feel better. So we have to make sure that what we are exhibiting, once again, that we have to make sure what we're exhibiting is something that we want them to emulate. Practice also means to give them kind of what the piece I was talking about earlier, you have to give them opportunities to yield that power and that control over their own lives. And this comes in terms of just giving them choices. And choices doesn't mean that they get complete control over their life and it's whatever they say goes. When I say choices, I mean, if it's a matter of we need to put your shoes on, it's, we're going to put your shoes on now or in 5 minutes. You can do it or I can help you. At the end of the day, the choices have to mean, you have to make sure that the choices garner the desired behavior that you want or the end result that you want. So if it's you want your child to have their shoes on, you need to make sure the choices that you give them ends with them getting their shoes on. So you don't want to say, do you want to put your shoes on? No, your shoes are going on either way, but I will give you the control or the option to either do the pink shoes or the red shoes, or we can do it now or in 5 minutes. That kind of choice. And that helps with that independence piece, right? Children need to feel like they have some kind of independence, some kind of control. And it kind of takes away that stress and that tug of war that we were talking about, where you're constantly trying to like yield this power over them that they don't want to give up. You're giving that power, but you're still getting what you want out of it, which is them putting their shoes on. So if we're going to use that in the scenario of your child getting upset because they can't get a toy, this looks like going over and saying, oh, this looks like this little girl or boy is playing with that toy first. We need to wait our turn. Do you want to give the toy back or do you want me to? The end result is that the child gets their toy back and your child learns that you cannot take toys away. You cannot hit to get toys that you want. and you need to wait your turn. And you're giving them the choices and the power to make the decision for themselves. But at the end of the day, the result is still the same. They have to wait their turns. They cannot hit their friends. We want to make sure that, like I said, we have to pour into those buckets, because when they don't feel like they have that, that's where the big emotions and they start to act out and fall, and have a little bit more of that power struggle because they don't have power anywhere else. So when we derive those natural kind of situations, then it helps out with them not needing to do the power everywhere else because they have those already naturally in their routine. Diana, my son meltdown at school and teachers haven't stopped playing with the toy and clean up. So this is a big one, and I want to just kind of pause with this. With children under 5, no one wants to stop what they're doing, right? And it's really hard for children to kind of conceptualize what that means and be like, oh, well, okay, let me just give it out. Because in their mind, there's a desire. I want to play with this toy. So by any means, they're going to fulfill that desire, right? So I would say, in terms of that, running out of ideas, I would say there needs to be a countdown. A lot of times children need to know, like, you have 5 minutes with this. You have 3 minutes with this. Giving those choices. You can clean it up or I can clean it up. You can have 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And the nice thing about having younger children, you can say 20 minutes and it really be 20 seconds, right? And sometimes that just even giving that extra 20 seconds or 30 seconds makes a world of difference, because in their mind, they feel like they had some kind of power and some kind of control, when really it didn't happen. But it alleviates that once again, that power struggle, because at the end, the toy still gets put away and the child doesn't engage in, like you said, a meltdown or a freak out. The E in P stands for expectation. This is really, really important. This is kind of that piece I was talking about earlier, where it needs to be concise, and this is where boundaries come. You're welcome, Diana. I hope I said it right. The expectation needs to be age and developmentally appropriate. We place unrealistic expectations on our children. We are doing them and ourselves a huge disservice. It is developmentally appropriate for a young child, to have to wiggle and fidget and wander. So asking them to sit in a long line or to sit still for long periods of time is unfair to them, and it's unfair to us, because it's not developmentally appropriate. You cannot expect a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old to sit down for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and not have to fidget. And the way to kind of alleviate that is maybe you bring a favorite toy, maybe you bring something that they can fidget with, something that they don't have to go then and find and derive that desire from something else. So they don't have to go pick the pen off the table, or go and grab someone's purse or something like that. Making sure that you kind of take that, you handle that desire or fulfill that need appropriately, will take away the need to have to do it inappropriately, or have them engage in that undesirable behavior to fulfill that need. And also, they need to be clear and concise, right? You have to make sure that you tell them. It's important to tell children what you expect of them, not what you don't expect. Because when we say don't hit our friends, it's like, okay, don't hit our friends, that's fine. But let's flip that on its head and say, well, we use gentle hands, or we keep our hands to ourselves. That way you're telling them exactly what you want from them, and there's no need to guess. There's no guessing game, right? We want to make sure that, or I'm using obtuse terms like be kind or be gentle. I fell a victim to that, and trapped to myself and say, use gentle hands. Well, to my 2-year-old, gentle hands could mean I hit you softly instead of smacking you, right? So I stopped using terms like that. I'm like, we don't hit our friends, or we keep our hands to ourselves, or we don't pinch our friends. Whatever the aggressive behavior is, call it specifically what it is and let them know we don't do this, or we do this. We do keep our hands to ourselves. We do not pinch our hands. Because when we use those obtuse terms, we allow for them to interpret it the way that their brain interprets it. And a lot of the times it's not the intention, or it doesn't come out how we intend it, right? So we want to make sure that when we do place that expectation, they know 100% what we're asking of them, so that there's no need, once again, to have to go over it again or them to have to guess what you're trying to say to them, excuse me. The next is action. This goes hand in hand with expectation. Once you place that expectation on your child, it's important to show the action, right? So if it's, we keep our hands to ourselves. So then if your child's engaged in aggressive behavior because they want something, showing them that we keep our hands to ourselves, put their hands in their laps. We keep our hands to ourselves. We don't hit our friends because that hurts them. We don't want to do that. And when if we're hurting our friends, if we can't keep our hands to ourselves, then it means we need to go somewhere else. Or that means we no longer can play with that toy, right? We want to make sure, we definitely want to make sure that action comes as close and as appropriate as we can to the expectation, because like I said, we want to form connections, right? So the quicker that we can place that action and have your child connect the two, where like this is the expectation, this is the action, the stronger it'll happen, and the more they'll be able to link that and kind of fall on that when they're in that situation again. Isabella, if a toddler hits you, how should you react to prevent it from happening again? So this I'll talk about a little bit soon, but I'm a huge, firm believer in natural consequences, right? So whenever I want to place a consequence or I want to place some form of discipline, I think to myself, well, if I did this as a grown adult, what would be my natural consequence for this, right? So if it's hitting, that person probably doesn't want to hang out with me anymore. Or I'll probably be kicked out of where I'm at or something like that. So that's what I would do with my child, right? So if they're hitting me or another toddler, I'd once again label what it is I expect. We do not hit our friends. We keep our hands to ourselves. Let them have that time to either exhibit it or not. And if they don't, then it means you remove it. And it's really important. And this will go on to there. I'll kind of put it out just in case. But that comes into the last one, which is example or explanation. So as you're telling them, as you're removing them or placing that consequence, saying, well, now you don't get to play with mommy anymore, or you don't get to play with your friend anymore because you hit your friends, and we don't hit our friends. We keep our hands to ourselves, right? So it's really just finding ways to have them connect their real world implication to what their behaviors are, because in their brains, it's not there yet. It's developing. So when we can derive that and help them make those connections, then they can rely on that as they grow and their brain starts to form those connections and it starts to click. Sorry, I lost my spot a little bit. So we want to make, and like I said before, when you know, kind of knowing how behavior works, knowing kind of what drives behavior, those 4 components of behavior, you can kind of start to see if you know, let's say, if you know that your child, let's use you, if your child hits because you place a demand, if you know that he's about to hit because you place a demand, the quicker that you can intervene before he actually gets that actual act of hitting you, you can kind of stop it before it happens, because there's something to be said, and this is rooted in psychology, something to be said that when you block them from actually making the contact and getting that kind of receptor or that reaction back, it takes away kind of the pleasure that they get out of it, right? So if they don't get to connect and actually hit you and see that reaction, then that behavior doesn't have any kind of reinforcement, whether that's negative or positive. So if you know that your child's going to act aggressively because you place a demand, it's maybe giving a little space between them and being like, I understand, and once again, labeling, right? I understand that you want to, play a little bit more, but it's time to go to sleep now. You can go now or in 5 minutes. And if you see them come in your way before you go there, you can either stop them and put their hands to their side and say, we're not going to hit mommy. Once again, label that emotion. I know it's frustrating or disappointing. We want to label emotions because once again, we're trying to form those connections with them. So we want to make sure that we're giving them the words to put with their emotions, right? So saying, I understand you're frustrated and you really want to play with this toy, but we can't right now. How about tomorrow we give an extra 5 minutes with this toy, or we put it somewhere super special so that when we're done eating or we wake up in the morning, we can come and play with it again. Once again, giving them that power and giving them that choice, and takes away them feeling like something was stripped away from them, that their power and their control was stripped away from them. Now you're giving it to them, and you've negated that whole situation before it got to the point where you had to correct instead of model, or to help them practice the desired behavior first. Does that make sense, Isabel? So that's okay, great. So that was action. So let's go on to connection and correction. So this is where you've tried all the other things. You're like, okay, I placed an expectation. Okay, I've showed them 1,000,000 times, and I still am not getting anywhere. I don't know what to do, right? This is what I mean. This is where connection comes in. This is where you, once again, that patience piece coming in, showing that connection, allowing you to be that safe space. Hey, I understand you're having a really rough time right now. Do you want to sit next to me for a couple minutes? And when you're ready, we can talk about it, or I can help you. Or do you want a hug? Do you want to sit in my lap? Do you want me? My daughter gets really upset when something's not going her way. She's playing with the toy and it's not working, right? I know I can't immediately go up to her. Sometimes I just sit back and I say, do you need help? And once again, labeling what they need, giving them those words, right? It looks like you're having a hard time. Can I help you? And like I said, my daughter is 18 months, so she doesn't have a lot of words. And that can, and kind of back to what was asked before, when did they get out of these problem behaviors? A lot of times it's when language forms is where it starts to kind of decrease a little bit, because a lot of times when they're outwardly expressing with their bodies, it's because they don't have the words for that. So when we label and help them kind of figure out the words to help out, or to get what they want out of whatever they're trying to get, then they don't have to use the behaviors now, because they can tell you, right? They can say, oh, I need help. Oh, I'm frustrated. Oh, I'm sad. Oh, I'm angry, instead of using their bodies and screaming or crying instead, right? We want to make sure that when we are connecting, we're connecting in the way that they do. And this looks different or the way that they are receptive. And this is why I asked earlier, is your daughter someone that is receptive to being soothed? Some children don't like to be soothed right away. My 5-year-old was never a child that liked to be, when he's in a heightened state, he doesn't like to be held, like, don't come in right away when he's really upset and give him a hug. That was not his jam. I had to learn as a parent, what was he most receptive of? And for him, it's usually sitting back. There's a certain point I kind of start to, and this is coming in, being in tune with your child, right? There's a certain point where he's calmed down enough where I can then be like, well, what do you need? Do you want me to give you a hug? Do you want me to help you with what you want? Is it you want a couple more minutes? How can we figure it out? What do you think is going on? And most times, and I learned this in the training that I did, when you give them the labels instead of questions, it helps much better than the question. When you give them labels and not the questions, it helps out, because sometimes the questions can create more anxiety in children. Imagine, like, as an adult, when we're feeling a lot of feelings, and then someone asks you, well, how can I help you? Or what do you need? Sometimes that exasperates us, because you're feeling so many things at once, and now you're asking me to now verbalize that to you. It can cause more anxiety and cause more frustration. So instead of asking, well, what do you need? Or use your words, or can you use your words? Sometimes it's like, are you frustrated? Or it sounds like you're frustrated. Label it for them. Give them the words that they don't have until they do have the words, right? And that comes with that connection. And then the correction piece and the consequence goes back to what I was saying with Isabel earlier. When you want to, what do you do to help to prevent things from happening again? That's correction and consequence. And that's where you now have the behavior, you've done all the other things and the behavior has not gone anywhere. Now it's time to correct the behavior and to place a consequence if they don't correct it on their own. But it's very, very, very important that you give them the opportunity to correct it on their own. And that looks like that presents itself in the choices, right? You can give your friend a toy back, or I can. You're still giving them that power, that control. You're still letting them feel like they have some kind of stake or some kind of say in how they move, how they conduct themselves in their world, right? But at the end of the day, they're still learning the same valuable skill of sharing, taking turns, not hitting or being aggressive when they don't get their way, right? So we want to make sure that when we're correcting, we're still giving them little bits to wield their own power within the limits of the expectation that we want, which is, in our scenario, we want them to take turns. We want to make sure that they keep their hands to themselves or not to engage in aggressive behavior. And the reason why natural consequences are so important is when things are derived naturally, your brain can form better connections, right? And that means it sticks. So when you remove your child from playing with something because they're not playing appropriately or they're not meeting the expectation that you've clearly and concisely put upon them, then that is directly linked to the behavior, right? They got removed because they weren't playing appropriately. Now, the opposite part of that is when we derive consequences that have nothing to do with the behavior. That would look like, well, you're not going to have a snack after school today, or you're going to go right to bed when you go home. That the correlation isn't there because it's not directly linked to the behavior. So all they see is that they're once again getting something else taken away from them. And since it's not something that is immediate or connected, they're like, well, now I've gotten this taken away and that. So it's kind of like a double whammy instead of it all being directly connected to that one undesired behavior or the one thing that we're trying to correct. And that makes it less effective, if effective at all, right? When we try to derive these situations or these consequences that have nothing to do with the situation at hand. The more immediate and the more connected the consequence to the behavior, the more effective it is. We're running a little bit low, so I'm going to finish this up and then we'll open up for questions. The last is example and explanation, right? This is all part of the connecting pieces. We want to make sure that we are really digging in and getting things to connect to your child and getting them to understand why their behavior has caused whatever consequence or outcome or reaction, right? So this is how they learn how to interact with the world. The more connections we can help our child make, the better chance that the desired behavior that we want will stick and the undesired behavior will decrease. In our scenario, if the child did comply and they did give the toy back and they kept their hands to yourself, you do something like, you'd say something or you would praise them and say like, oh, you did so great keeping your hands to yourself. I really liked how you took turns with your friend and that meant that we were able to stay and play. Wasn't that great? You're helping them kind of connect the dots and get the wheels turning up like, oh, wow, that was great. I was able to play and I was able to stay. If they didn't, then once again, it's that piece of you have to explain. You have to, and I know it's like, oh, another component. It can be really tiring and stuff like that. But if you really want it to withstand the test of time, that explanation is very important because once again, it helps their brain form those other connections so that it has a stronger, it's a little bit of rooted in psychology where there's synapses, right? Our brains constantly have these connections that are made. And the more times that you can make that connection kind of spark, it's kind of like an electricity plug, the stronger it becomes and the more you can rely on it, the quicker you can recall it. So that's what we're doing with our children with this model. We're making sure that those connections where their behavior caused this, which caused this, it helps strengthen those synapses and it helps them learn. So as they grow and they get into another situation, they can be like, oh, you know what? Oh, I remember the last time that I hit or the last time I kept my hands to myself. Conversely, right? I was able to play longer or I was able to stay here or, I didn't get stuff taken away from me. So that will help that desired behavior stick and withstand the test of time. Another thing is that we want to make sure that we're giving the explanations. If you can use explanations that kind of have happened or the behavior kind of adversely affected them. So let's say maybe, they have an older sibling and their sibling hit them and it made them cry. Using those natural consequences or those natural kind of occurrences to help kind of reinforce what we're talking about or the behavior we're trying to address. Oh, remember when so-and-so hit you and it made you really sad and you don't want to play with them anymore. Well, that's how your friend felt, or that's how mommy feels when you hit me. Once again, strengthening those synapses, making more connections so that your child can strengthen those connections and really stick in their brains, right? So they can recall it as those situations come up again. And the key again is labeling. Make sure that you label. Get as many times that you can give them the words or label what's happening, the better, because then then it's taking away that need to have to express themselves in any other form, which usually comes out in the tantrums, the crying, the screaming. These tips, like I said, are just the foundation. Every child is different. Every family is different. What each of these will look like for each one of you or your child is going to be different, because there's no one child that looks the same. The way that I practice patience with my daughter is much different than I practice patience with my son, because they respond differently to different things. And that's kind of, and that's where knowing where the basis or the basics of behavior comes from helps you kind of navigate, well, what's just the underlying tone to this? Is it they want an activity, they want a tangible, they want attention, self-stimulation, right? But I can assure you that using these will really help you confidently be able to tackle these challenging moments rather than it be against you, which is the ultimate goal, or against your child. You two kind of the back and forth tug of war, and which is what we want, right? I do want to wrap up our talk with just a little sentiment, and that we as parents will not always get it right. Our child will not always get it right, and that's okay. The perfect child and the perfect parent does not exist. It's a fallacy. We're I feel like as a society we are bombarded with, you have to have this perfectly behaved child and all of that. And even on our best days, and even a well-behaved child will have their off days, and that's okay. This is why we want to make sure that we form these synapses. So when they do have these off days, we can rely on those strong connections that we've made grew and developed when they were younger. As they get older and start to kind of have more capacity to make those connections and form those connections on their own. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor for any questions you all may have before we conclude for the night. And I see one from Shayna. Give me 1 second, Shayna. 3-year-olds makes us repeat certain words and phrases over. Okay, you want us to say it back to her and repeat it each time she said over. Shayna, I'd have to look at a little bit more. Repetition in itself doesn't really 100% once again kind of indicate any kind of behavior or any kind of disorder directly. Repetition for children is how they learn. So hearing and doing things over and over and over again is kind of how, once again, like we're learning how to do those synapses. They're trying to form those connections. Their brain is trying to make sense of it, right? So we'd have to talk a little bit more in detail for me to answer a question like that, because there's a little bit more that goes into kind of the mental health and stuff like that. Christy, can you remind me of your listening question again? You guys can unmute and ask as well. Oh, wait, I see. Christy Lewis. Why am I the only one my daughter doesn't listen to? Everything she won't like it, but when she gets frustrated, she hurts her feelings. I want to say that a lot of the times, us parents, especially the moms, gets the worst of our behavior, our child's behavior. It's a lot of it. A lot of professionals link it to the fact that we carry them and we have the strongest connection with them, so they feel the safest with us, which means they also express themselves the most with us. And once again, sometimes expression comes out in the screaming, the not listening, and stuff like that, because especially, I don't know how she is with other people. Sometimes when a child is really, 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 really well behaved outside, it's kind of like if you think about being wrapped really nicely all day. Once you kind of get unwrapped, like you come home and you take your like nice clothes off, and you've been in like work clothes all day, and you come home and you relax, you kind of unwind, right? And you kind of let it all out. It's kind of how children are, right? So if they've been kind of in this box and neatly wrapped all day, like listening to all the demands placed on them, eventually they become unwrapped. And then it's kind of like, it's a mess, right? And it's typically with the parents. And I know it stinks to hear, but it typically ends up falling on the mom. But there are ways to work on her learning how to, it comes with that expressing, right? We have to, teaching her how to express herself without it being, I guess with her not listening, once again, I have to talk a little bit more detail with you to see kind of what it is that's triggering her, but there has to be kind of getting behind to the why, the four functions. Why is she not listening? It's probably to avoid something or because she wants something. So if you're the person that is, I will say this, a lot of the times it's the moms that are placing kind of the boundaries. I know between me and my husband, I'm more of the authoritarian. So a little bit of the times I get the worst of it because they know I'm the one that's going to place the demands and the rules on them. And they don't like that, right? So I get ignored too sometimes. And it kind of just comes with the job a little bit. But that's not to say that you can't correct it where I speak to my children like I speak to you all, right? So with my son, if he's having an off day and he ignores me, something like that, and it's like I once again label, hey, that makes me really upset that you're not listening to me. First I start, did you hear what I said? If he says yes, well then why didn't you respond? Well, I didn't really want to, whatever he says. Okay, well when you don't respond to me, that makes me really upset because I don't think you can hear me, or it makes me really sad. Whatever that makes you feel, right? And that's valid. And then use an example, like if mommy didn't listen to you when you asked me to close the door or to feed you or something like that, that wouldn't make you feel any better either, right? Connecting those, once again, using real world implications and real world occurrences to help kind of fortify that, like, no, you can't just ignore your mom. And I understand that is very, very frustrating. It is extremely frustrating to be ignored, and children are so very good at it. It's like a superpower of theirs. Denisha, I think I see you're unmuted.
Yes, I am. Good night. I had a question. Earlier you mentioned pretty much trying to, I guess, address the situation like in the moment. My question would be, how do you address it like at a later time? For example, my 6-year-old, he just recently got diagnosed as having ADHD. He is not having the best time in school. The school is still trying to figure out, how to help us as the parents to pretty much get him through the day. It seems like he gets really restless, like he just has a hard time just focusing, and then the tantrums follow. They aren't really doing much at school as yet because we just found out about the diagnosis. But if he has a really hard day at school and I pick him up, I'll be honest, I'm guilty of saying, hey, you know what, punishment, we're not going to have the iPad this weekend. But you mentioned earlier trying to do it when it happens. How do I do that if I'm not there at school or there like exactly when it happens? How do I still put some sort of accountability for the actions by the time I get him?
So in that instance, once again, that's obviously hard to place. That falls on the school, right? Having some kind of thing in place with them where there's an immediate consequence that they implement, and that's something that they should kind of coordinate with you. But also, I actually work with a child that has ADHD and he's on the spectrum. And what we do is, once again, we want with the children with those diagnoses, it's much more efficient to fuel or to reinforce the positive behavior than to consequence, right? Because it's almost like a double whammy. And with the way that their brain the way that their brain understands things, it's really tricky to it's really tricky to try to increase the behavior by placing something or removing something, right? There is usually, you want to kind of find ways to reinforce that desired behavior. So if it is listening to his teachers, stuff like that, having some kind of reward or some kind of like thing for him to achieve will be way more beneficial than taking away iPad time. Because screens, as I know, usually are very big for children with ADHD and that are on the spectrum. So taking that off, it almost takes away your kind of the power that you have to kind of keep them enticed, or the reward that you want, right? So we want them to work towards it. So maybe it's like you don't get your iPad until you have X amount of days in a row, or you get an extra time on your iPad when you get X days in a row of listening to your teachers. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Right, that's kind of what we have set up right now. So I have it where it's like every day that he has a good day or I don't get a call from school, there's an extra hour added on to his time. If he does all of his homework on the first day, there's an extra hour. So like it starts off working great and then he loses the momentum. It's no longer fun. And then he has like really, really bad days where it's just like, okay, you didn't care at all whether you were going to have this reward at the end of the week or not. Like this behavior is just out there. It cannot be reclaimed. Do I just leave it to the school to say, hey, they tried to handle it at that time, I don't need to address it again as the parent? Or do I address it as a parent? And if so, how would I do that? Because at this point, it would be hours after the action.
Right. Yeah. So that would have to be something that you'd have to coordinate with the school if you want it to be immediate. And that's definitely something that we could talk about. I don't want to take up too much. We're about to wrap up, so I wanted to be, but it's definitely something that you'd have to coordinate with the school, because like you said, like 4 hours later and it being like something that happens, it just does not connect as much and it's not as impactful. I just lost my thought. But yeah, no, I would say something like, it's an ebb and flow. Like I said, like children will go through, like you said, like they'll have a hot streak and then something will happen. This has been a crazy year. So there's like these really a lot of external factors that kind of disrupt the I guess the productivity or the upwards trend. So that's something that we can definitely talk about. Like I said, I'm on the app, so if anyone, I was able to get some more questions tonight. I'm really sorry. I thought I allowed more time. So if anyone wants to have additional questions or have another session with me, you can book me through the app. My name is, once again, Danyale Washington. But it's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you all tonight. You're welcome, Denisha. Erica, I see you're unmuted. Oh, okay, I didn't need anything. It's been an absolute pleasure having you all. I hope that you guys got something out of this talk. Once again, if you guys would like more help, or if you'd like to delve in deeper, I do help with behavioral support. That's one of my services that I do provide via the app. So that's definitely, you can go on and book a session with me. Does anyone have any other questions before we go? We've got about 2 minutes. Or need anything reiterated or anything like that? Okay, no. Everyone. Oh, you're welcome, Haley. Thank you all so much for being here. Have a great rest of the night. You're welcome, Isabel. Have a good night, everyone. You're welcome, Hadar. It's been a pleasure. I hope to have many more talks, so please be on the lookout. Bye, everyone.